Hey guys, so today we're going to be talking about what to do with quotations because very soon we're going to be writing about poetry. We want to be able to quote things and put them in our writing without just doing a bunch of crazy stuff, okay? Alright, so the basics. Hopefully we know this first part, but whenever you exactly quote the words of another person, it should be in quotation marks, not parentheses, which I'll sometimes like to call them, but quotation marks are little double commas floating up in the air, okay? All right, so a couple examples. Maria said, let's go to that new taco place for lunch. Notice we put Maria's words in quotation marks, okay? Same thing here. On page 157, the author stated, Pericles was the greatest and most influential of the Athenian statesmen. Notice we circle his quotation marks because we put them around his statement. Okay, now make sure your paper is looking just like my paper, okay? All right, now when we quote someone else's words, we put our quotation marks, and we also want to make sure we're capitalizing and punctuating correctly. So when we quote someone, we capitalize the first letter of the quote if we're quoting a complete sentence, okay? Makes sense, right? You always capitalize the first word of your sentence, okay? So even though this one's kind of put inside of another sentence, we're still going to capitalize that. All right, so example, Mr. Johnson, around Mr. Johnson's words, okay, and I capitalized the first letter of the because I was quoting a complete sentence of Mr. Johnson's, okay? All right, now, if I'm only using part of a sentence, so I'm just taking out like a small chunk of what someone said, I don't need to capitalize. Again, we don't need to capitalize things that aren't sentences, okay? So example, although Mr. Johnson has seen odd happenings on the farm, he stated that the spaceship certainly takes the cake when it comes to unexplainable activity. So I put Mr. Johnson's words in quotation marks, but I didn't need to capitalize certainly because I was just taking one little phrase of what he said and quoting it, okay? Now, if you broke up the quote mid-sentence, and I'll talk about what that means, don't capitalize the second part of the quote, okay? So, example, I didn't see an actual alien being, Mr. Johnson said, but I sure wish I had. Okay, so notice when I start my quote, I capitalize it because I'm beginning a sentence. But then I interrupt myself here with Mr. Johnson said, so I do not capitalize it when I start my quote back up again. I'm still in the middle of that sentence. It doesn't need to be capitalized. Okay, so basically, if it's a sentence, capitalize it. If it's not, don't. Okay? All right, so that leads us with punctuation. What do we want to do with our punctuation? Okay, so commas and periods, no matter what, whether they were part of the original quotation or not, or just part of the sentence you're writing right now, they go inside the quotation marks, okay? So example, the best investments today, according to Smith, are commodities and emerging market stocks. So notice, I put my comma inside my quotation marks, I put my period inside my quotation marks, okay? Even if I didn't originally have that comma and period in the quote, I still put them inside the quotation marks, okay? Now, the only exception to this, all right, if I'm giving a page number for something, so I'm citing my source, so I quote something from a book and I want to put what page number I got it from, okay? Then I put the period after the page number because my sentence isn't actually over yet, all right? So, an example, the best investments today, according to Smith, are commodities and emerging market stocks. 301, then my period. So notice, no period inside the quotation marks, period after the page number, okay? Now, unless they are part of the original quotation, all marks other than commas and periods are placed outside the quotation marks, okay? So, example, she provides a thorough list of problems in her most recent article, Misery in Paradise. She doesn't provide a solution. I don't put my semicolon inside that quotation mark, okay? Just period and commas do that, all right? Example, wasn't it Dickens who wrote, it was the best of times, it was the worst of times, question mark, okay? So my question mark goes outside my quote because I'm asking a question about that quote. That quote isn't a question, okay? So my question mark can go outside of it, right? Now, you have a quote you want to talk about in your writing, okay? You know how to capitalize it, you know how to punctuate it, but how do I stick a quote inside a sentence or paragraph without making it kind of awkward? Okay, so let's talk about that. All right, so most of the time we just use a comma when we're about to do a quote. Okay, so Comma, that's what you usually use. So the flight attendant asked, "May I see your boarding pass?" We put a comma before the quote. Buddha says, comma, "Even death is not to be feared by one who has lived wisely." Again, I put a comma before my quote. So 9 times out of 10, just do your little introduction. So-and-so says, comma, then your quotation. Okay? All right, now, sometimes you'll use a colon. Okay? And that's when you're introducing a big, long quote. Okay? Your quote is a full sentence by itself, or maybe it's even multiple sentences. Okay? And then we can use a colon. All right? So, in Food Rules, Michael Pollan summarizes extensive writing about food with 7 words of advice. Colon. Eat food, not too much, mostly plants. All right, so whenever I can give my complete sentence, give a little colon, and then my quote, okay, that's when I want to use the colon. So I did a complete sentence. I didn't just say Michael Pollan said. I gave a whole sentence about what he did, okay? Now, sometimes you don't need any punctuation, all right? So when the quoted material is very short and flows right in our sentence, we don't need punctuation with it, okay? So in our closing statement, the prosecutor spoke forcefully of the defendant's callous disregard for human life. So fits right in my sentence, all right? I don't need to, give a comma or a colon, all right? The phrase, "be that as it may," appears far too often in this essay. Same thing, it flows right in my sentence. I don't need to interrupt it with commas or colons. Now, if you put the quote first, so if you put your little introduction second, quote first, you just put the comma after the quote. So, Frank died 2 days ago, comma, Charlie writes. All right, and notice my comma is inside my quotation marks because commas always are inside the quotation marks. All right, so now poetry is a little bit weird, right? Because poetry has all these different lines and all this stuff going on, okay? So when you're quoting poetry, okay, if you're quoting multiple lines of poetry, all right, you're going to put a slash between the lines. So example, for "if dreams die, life is a barren field." So instead of having to hit enter and start a whole new thing, you can just put a slash. Makes it easy, okay? However, if you're quoting a whole big chunk of poetry, okay, indent the lines and don't use quotation marks, right? So in Langston Hughes' poems, Dreams, he states, colon, "Hold fast to dreams, for if dreams die, life is a broken-winged bird that cannot fly." Okay? So then you make it its whole own little paragraph almost, except it's all indented. Okay? All right, so we're going to do a lot of practice with this. I know this is a lot of information. Okay, so just to quickly recap. All right? People's words, other people's words, go in quotes. Okay? When it's a complete sentence, capitalize the first letter of the quote. Periods and commas go inside quotation marks. Other stuff doesn't. All right? And when you're quoting with a short introduction, like Mrs. McAllister says, use a comma. If you've got a big, long introduction, use a colon. All right? When you quote poetry, it's a little short chunk. Put slashes between the lines. If it's long, make it its own little paragraph. Okay? So, again, we'll practice with this a lot. That was a lot of stuff. All right, so let me know tomorrow if you have any questions.